Our lead story here tonight was the news of the first diagnosed case of Ebola in the U.S.
The World Health Organization calls it an extraordinary event.
The worst outbreak in the history of the Ebola virus.
This most deadly Ebola outbreak has so far affected 4 countries in West Africa. The official statistics say 932 people have died so far, and that number will rise.
Take a look in here. This really jumped out at me. Mid-May, they thought things were basically under control. But then look what happens at the beginning of June. Everything takes off. This is on its way to becoming the worst Ebola outbreak in history.
In the summer before the start of the school year, I was preparing for pre-calculus. There were reports coming out of Ebola spreading in Africa, parts of Africa. The reports were very alarmist. The claims were being made that Ebola was spreading at an incredible rate. It's speculation that uses mathematical terms, so it's kind of a misuse of statistics for me. Students said, well, maybe the media sources felt like they needed to use this kind of language in order to generate more awareness or more public support or funding or that kind of thing. I want my students to be able to be critical thinkers. I don't want them to just be taking in, reading something and accepting it as true, hearing something, listening to the news. You know, what is the responsibility of the media then? If there's just one person who has Ebola in the States, is it okay for the media to be alarmist or to spread fear?
I would say last year I first heard about the whole spread of Ebola in general sometime before school really started.
People were making a pretty big deal out of it, saying that all people were going to get affected by it.
I would say I was getting my information from generally wherever it was coming to me.
CNN, Vice News, probably the World Health Organization too, UN sources like that.
There were a lot of numbers just being thrown out by media sources that weren't really being backed up by anything.
There were these big projections that it was going to surpass, you know, like 1 million people or something, and that it was going to grow exponentially and take over the world.
What was Newton's answer?
Mr. Verco came to our class with the project still early in the year. It was one of the first things we did as a class, so still mid-fall.
I thought it was pretty cool at first, you know, really interesting that we were graphing the projected death number, infected number. I thought that was a good application of the skills we were learning.
And so I said, all right, first thing to do, grab some data.
Give me others. Sarah?
The biggest problem was within the group, if two different people use 2 different sources, it was going to change the data a lot.
Maybe the reason we were getting numbers that were so all over the board was that there was simply a lack of communication.
So if my partner who did step 1 used CNN, and then the partner who did step 2 used Fox News, and then I was step 3 and I used Vice News, just as an example, that was really going to mess things up.
I knew that they had not had any exposure to data analysis and statistical analysis, and I also knew that the story was unfolding very quickly.
We were learning how to graph the certain types of functions, so it was like a step-by-step process with that. We were supposed to predict the number of infections for the next month, and then based on that we would determine whether it would reach this 1 million or 2 million casualty mark.
We did a quadratic function, cubic function, and quartic function.
We had to do regression analysis, which is in your calculator and tells you how close to the actual trend line of data that we put into our calculators each function was.
That line hopefully is something that you can project ahead into the future and estimate number of cases.
So we wanted to know how many people, again, were infected, but how many people were going to be infected in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months.
We had to take a look at 4 different types of functions and decide which one worked best with the data we had and got the most, reasonable result. The reason we didn't use the exponential function as our function of choice, the reason it wasn't as close, is because basically once you get to exponential, that shows that basically all hope is lost, the world's going to end. Because basically that means that for every person that gets infected, they are going to infect 2 other people.
If you have 1 as a base, what you're saying then is that 1 person is infected. And if that person is isolated, there's no growth whatsoever. One of the highlights for me of the year was Board of Visitors came in. And it was right around the time when the kids were presenting their findings. The students were reporting to the Board of Visitors on the numbers they had.
We came to the conclusion that it was 37,000 infected.
The correct function was a quartic function. It's Q-U-A-R-T. Quart. I see.
They were professional. They gave these figures, and later, this was in October, in January, the numbers matched up. Their numbers matched up.
I'd say definitely that PARC teaches our students to be more globally minded. I think basically anyone in our school is evidence of that, and definitely this project is evidence of that.
You do have the choice to pay attention or not, and it is far better to pay attention.
If the virus would mutate and become easier to transmit airborne, then that might allow it to spread past the
much more rapidly and much more dangerously.
There's certainly an obligation that the media has to uphold, whether it's a radio station or a television broadcasting system. You are constantly in communication with the general public, and that ranges at this point across all ages and across all demographics in America. You are essentially creating the environment of the country.
The thing that I took away from this project the most was you gotta do your own research. You gotta make sure all the research within your project is cohesive and you use all the same facts. And, don't trust everything you hear on TV.